My name is Molly Flanagan, and I'm part of the faculty development team. And so today's session is on course design, backward course design. And I chose this topic because working with instructors one-on-one often, we help them develop courses. And it seems like a really difficult process, very complex, kind of intricate process to take this whole body of knowledge and figure out how to weave it into a 15-week span in some sort of logical way that kind of all holds together. So I wanted to see if I could understand a little bit more about that for myself and the instructors I work with, and to share some of that with you. So today our plan is to explore this one approach to course design called backward course design. And we're going to do that together by co-constructing a course. We've got our craft supplies out here to get into it. And then we're going to, if there's time, we're going to have you actually explore this process for yourself and do a little bit of applying the backward design process to a course that you might want to design. Okay? Mary?
I have a question. Is there a way to think about this and apply it to something you're already doing and modify what you're doing?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Be sure it was okay to do that.
Good question. Yes, absolutely. This is for courses that you're creating from scratch and courses that you might be reworking as well. Okay? So just a super quick thought about course design. I was thinking about it and I was like, what is a metaphor that works? And I think that a course is kind of like a journey, right? You think about that there's a very specific beginning and a very specific endpoint, right? You have a fixed amount of time with your students on any course, right? At the academy, it's generally during a semester 15 weeks, yeah? So see if I can count this off right. Okay, so within this journey, kind of the question is, well, where does this journey lead, right? Where is this going to, we have this time with our students, where are they going to end up? What's going to happen for them by the end of this process? And so traditional approaches to course design tend to start over here at the beginning, tend to start with the instructor thinking about, okay, well, what would I teach on day 1? And what might I cover day 2? And day 3, 4, 5, what might some lectures be that I would do, or some topics that I would demonstrate in my class, right? That's a very typical approach that can be an easy way to wrap your head around this process. But sometimes what happens if you're just doing that from your own perspective of what will I cover, what will I teach, it still doesn't really get at what will students learn, because it's all oriented towards what will I do as the instructor. So what backward course design does is it actually flips this whole thing on its head, and it says, instead of thinking about what I'm going to teach and putting the whole focus there, let's actually start here at the end and get really clear about what the learning goals are for students. So determining where do I want students to arrive by the end? What are the knowledge and the skills that they need to have by the end of this journey that we're going to go on together? So it's instead of starting from the beginning and working to the end, it's starting with the goals and then finding that the goal actually orients us and helps us figure out what that trip is going to look like, what's going to happen to get them to that point. Okay. Is this a familiar paradigm for you? Kind of a process that you may have heard of before, backward design? Okay. It's not rocket science, but I've found it to be super helpful just in terms of thinking differently and approaching this task. Okay. So if everything that we do in the 15 weeks is built and designed to lead students to this point of this learning, right, these knowledge and skills that they need to acquire, then let's take a look at how that would work. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we're gonna co-construct a course together, and the course I've chosen for you all is Driving 101. And the reason I've chosen this topic is because it's something that everyone's familiar enough, right? Everybody's either driven or been close to driving for a number of years. And it's also something that's far enough away from your area of expertise as instructors. It's far enough away from your professional field so that it won't be distracting. Okay? You can just focus on this backward design thing and not get caught up in the content. Okay? So with backward design, where would I start again? What's the first thing I would do? Here? Okay, here. Okay, we're going to start at the end. Yeah. We're going to start with outcomes. Very good. Course learning outcomes, right? Does that sound familiar? Course learning outcomes. They're also sometimes known as CLOs, course learning outcomes. Just think of those as your big learning goals for students. What do you want them to know? What do you want them to be able to do by the end of the class? So if we're in Driving 101, right? We're in this very introductory driving class. Students are learning this for the first time. This is a basic course. Think for a second about what your goals would be. What do you want them to know and do by the end of that course? Just take a second. Maybe jot down a couple notes. Turn to the person next to you and share your ideas. What'd you come up with? What are your goals for Driving 101 students? Big picture goals. Okay, let's think about like overarching, if you can sort of frame them in the bigger sense. Maybe not all the tiny, tiny skills, but the big groups of skills.
Want them to be
What you guys come
comfortable
up
and
with?
safe on the road.
Okay. Be safe. Yeah. Nice. Be safe in what capacity? As a passenger, as a
Driving.
As a driver. Okay, so should we say drive safely?
Yeah.
Okay, great. We're going to get into a little refining and distilling. Drive safely. And you said on the road. Do we want them, what kind of road? Do we want them to just do street driving, highway, both? This is your first level. What do you think is appropriate?
Both.
Parking lot. Street, highway, parking lot?
No.
Street and highway.
Street and highway. Okay, great. Great. What else?
Navigation skills.
Aha. Navigate. What are they navigating particularly?
How to get from place to place.
Mm-hmm.
How to read a map. Traffic.
Mm-hmm. Wow, how to read a map. Okay, that could get pretty deep. Basic map skills? Okay, use it. Navigate. Find your way. Uh-huh.
Teach them how to use Google Maps.
Google Map, okay, great. All right, what else?
Traffic laws.
Okay, follow the traffic laws, right? Obey the traffic laws, yeah? You have to learn them first, and then you can apply them. What else?
Basic mechanical knowledge.
Mm-hmm. To operate the car?
Yep.
Okay. So, what would we call that? Just operate the vehicle?
Basic maintenance. The group said oil check, airing tires, filling the tank.
Okay, hold on to that. That's good.
Looking at the dials. Knowing how to interpret the dials.
Okay, so we're starting to get into the parts of the car, right? The dash, the various aspects. Is this an automatic driving or stick shift?
Automatic.
Okay. All right, level 1, right? Just the basics. That's a whole nother set. Anything else essential?
Handling emergencies.
Very good. Okay. In what ways?
Flat tires and like cars conking out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, how would you say that?
Mm-hmm.
Overheating.
How would you say that?
Troubleshooting.
Troubleshoot emergencies? Okay.
Drive safely too as far as avoiding.
Okay, great.
Parallel parking.
Great. Can we say that that's part of maybe the basic driving, and we can maybe fold it in there? Or is parking its own? Maybe we should specify. Park. Parallel and just straight.
They make you do that when you take your driving test.
That's true. That's true. Okay, so parallel parking and regular, whatever that's called. Okay, great.
Then how about laws and rules? Oh, there we go.
Ah,
To get
nice.
licensed. So that might be, and we have to know many of these things.
That's a
You know,
great
to
goal.
examine.
That's a great goal. Should we have that?
DMV handbook.
Pass the DMV test?
Oh, interesting.
That's a nice one. So maybe you incorporate that into your class. Okay. Exactly. So I think I'm going to have to cut us off because we're getting to our CLO, our course learning outcome limit. Does that feel like we've covered the basics though? Kind of the most important things, right? They're driving, they're finding their way, they're following traffic laws, operating the car, dealing with emergencies, parking, and hopefully passing a test. That sounds like a pretty robust but really good first pass course. Okay, so from here, where do we go? Backward design. So we start with the end point. This is what students should be able to do by the end. This is going to show us that our journey together with them has been a success. So the next thing in this process that we would do is think about the assessment. Think about how are we going to know that they've achieved these skills? What is it that we can have them do to show us
Demonstrate.
that they can drive safely?
Demonstrate by doing it like a driver's test.
Okay, great. So let's look at our, actually, maybe I'll do it over here. Managing space. Okay. So let's think about this as like our final, okay? So the final is going to be a test, a driving test. All right. And a what?
Written and
Nice.
a vehicle test.
Yeah. So a road test and a written exam, right? Absolutely. Can we kind of cover everything in that? This is a driving test. Finding your way, that could be probably part of a written test. This is a big thing that would show up on a written test, right? Yes, good point. Good point. We can check this when they're driving. Yeah, they know how to turn it on. They know how to use the signals. Troubleshooting emergencies, where would that be assessed? You simulate a huge crash. Maybe not.
Could be dangerous.
I think a written test.
Written test.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
People, if you don't want to,
Yeah.
kind of interesting.
Create scenarios and then give options, and then they would have had to study that, and then you
Exactly.
test them on that information.
Exactly. You can give them case studies, have them figure out how they would respond to different emergencies, right? Parking, part of the driving test, I'm guessing. And then this may be dictating a lot of the elements in our written test. So it sounds like we have a way here with our assessments to get at all of those outcomes and make sure we're checking them out. Okay, so your next task is to work in your same groups, if you like, to think about everything that's going to go into the driving test and everything that's going to go into the written test. I mean, we've kind of already done that together, but we want to flesh it out even more. So let's start it. Let's start it together. So the driving is going to include what are all the skills that you're going to be measuring in the driving?
Turning on the car?
Okay, right? Yep. Yeah, you might be able to set up your driving test so that they have to go through particular areas with certain signs.
But you
Yeah,
have to know
but
it in a
also
written
like
test
what the
before you
lines
do it.
mean on the road and
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
what the signs mean and like the international language of the signs.
Mm-hmm. So we're responding appropriately to given signage on the street or painted lines.
Maneuvering, I guess. Kind of steering, but
Mhm.
I'm thinking a little bit more maybe hard turns.
Aha. Turning. Let's get that in here. Okay.
And driving backwards?
We got-
that
we got
driving
that in there, I
102?
think.
Backing up?
Backing up?
is there,
Yes.
I think.
Yes. Good, Jim. Yeah. Great. Okay. That's great. So let's think a little bit more about the written exam. Actually, when I let you guys generate that in your small groups, and just figure out what is it in terms of traffic laws that you're going to be covering, anything else on the written test that you need to kind of flesh out. Use your partners. I bet they can set you up.
That's actually-
Great. Do you want small ones? I'll give you small post-its how they're going to create a cohesive.
That, just to know what's the steering wheel, where's the brake.
Say that.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Parts of the car.
In relation to why is it important? Why is it?
Do you guys want to walk us through that briefly?
So, before you get in a car, you gotta go through the driver's training. They give you a little book and you read through it. You take a test and pass that, then you can take the driving test.
So you would do the test at the beginning of the class?
Yeah. I don't think you're able to drive a car unless you pass that test.
Prerequisite.
Yeah.
Ah, so maybe we need a driving zero, driving the pre-101.
Well, it's part of your knowledge skills, so that
Yeah.
you know the rules of the road and what you're supposed to do, giving right of way. So, if you come to an intersection, you have to give the right of way to the person on the right. And then, if there's a siren going on, you have to pull to the right, let the emergency car go by. Okay. And then there's the driving skills, which you could take a book and read it, or your father or your driving instructor can give you where to look for gauges and adjusting the mirrors and things that before you drive you have to know your car. And then it becomes navigation. How do you go forward, backwards, left, right? Parking skills. Actual driving, I think in real life, you go onto the DMV parking lot. They give you a test over there.
Uh-oh, your course is falling apart.
So it's sort of self.
Yeah. So that sounds like a kind of a similar approach to what I'm getting over here, kind of
Now-
fronting it with lots of
Now my
information
son,
before you get in.
who was just about ready to learn to drive, he wanted to download this simulated driving test. But so he wanted me to pay $10 for this driving game. And I said, well, that's not really driving, that's simulating driving on a computer.
Yeah.
But, so he has it, you could drive left and right, you press buttons to go left, which is not really driving.
Right. So we're back to the simulator
Yeah,
idea.
yeah.
That's a really nice approach if you
Unless
have the
you have a
resource.
real steering wheel, that would
Yeah.
give you, sensibilities of
Got
if you're
it.
going at a certain speed, how much space you need between the cars and all that.
Thank
So-
you. The trick, and if we had more time, we would kind of look more closely and look and see, is there anything here that might start straying into the driving 201 category, because you only have a certain amount of time, right? And you don't want it to be packed too tight. So that's always the question that you're going to be weighing: is this for this particular journey, or is this for the next leg in the journey, or is this from the last trip that students took before this class, right? Thinking about just these very specific goals and how to keep everything focused here. And that's a challenge, but the good thing about Post-its is that you can generate and brainstorm and get all this stuff out of your head and then look more carefully and scrutinize and take things out if they don't fit. Yeah. How did this process work for you, this paper moving, sorting business?
I think we have a tendency to want to organize things, so we immediately started grouping things together.
Yeah. We're pattern seekers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually a pretty good thing because you can see clearly the transition and see if some things are missing.
Yeah.
And you may not even see it right away, but you can actually adjust, you know, and so it's pretty helpful.
Good. Yeah, I actually haven't used this technique very much, and I've often found that I go through like 40, 50 drafts of scratch paper, you know, and so having some sort of process that's a lot more malleable seems like a good thing.
Molly, I have a question.
Yeah.
Obviously, there is, I know we're doing this as a hypothetical thing, but wouldn't one of the things, the first things you would do, if in fact you were charged with creating a curriculum, is look at existing curriculums for this very topic, which I kept thinking of, you know, driver's ed, you know, from like
Absolutely.
1950s when I did it to now.
Yes.
I'm sure it's very different.
Yes, right. Like if you're going to have the test be part of your class, you need to know exactly what that covers so that you can be teaching all of those topics, right, and giving students practice. Yeah. Yeah, in some cases. Absolutely. So you would need to do some research. Yeah, definitely. Any other thoughts or questions before we move on right now? All right. So I want to just do a quick recap of that process. So on your handout, what I tried to do is just walk us through these steps visually. So again, on the first page, they're starting with your goals, determining where students need to be by the end of the course, right? That's the first step. And you want to focus on skills that they haven't done before. Okay, these are very specific, right, to this particular journey. So one point I wanted to reiterate was that, you know, your course with its particular target, its particular learning outcomes, is part of a much larger journey, right? And it may be at the beginning of the journey, it may be in the middle somewhere, but there's a lot of pieces here. So you want to think about what's going to make this particular course, this one that I'm designing, really unique and different, and it's that what are the outcomes going to do to prepare the student for the next set of outcomes and the next set and the next set. Because all of this journey is going towards something really big as a degree, right? The students are being prepared to enter their chosen field. So you've got a whole set of program learning outcomes that are these bigger targets. Okay, so that was the first step. And then on the next page, the second step, our sample course involved exams. That was our particular way of checking to see if students were meeting the goals. But here at the Academy, a lot of your classes are going to be more project-based, right? There's a whole number of ways that you can assess student work. You can do, you know, there's a little checklist here. You can do a project, presentation. Maybe it's a writing class. Maybe it's papers. Maybe it's some combination of all of these things. But what I think is really fascinating about this backward design thing is that once we generated all of the, when we defined really clearly the final, we got all of our course content. It generated all from here. So everything came from these goals and this final project. Everything just kind of appears. It's kind of magic. It's like, it's not like, okay, what am I going to teach in this course? It's like, okay, what are the goals? And then that generates. And then what's the project, or what's the assessment? And then that generates most all of the content. You might be adding to it or taking out, but it's kind of there. So this box here is just kind of a space for you to really flesh out your final project in particular, so that you get all that content out. But then, you might also, it's really common to also have a midterm, right? You might have a class with a couple of really big projects or assessments. So it's not necessarily just this one thing that's going to generate the content, but this one is going to point to all of these things, and then you prepare them for each checkpoint along the way. You know that by week 3 they have to be ready for this project, so I'm going to teach X, Y, and Z things that are going to be part of that. Yeah? Okay. I feel like I'm talking a lot. Any questions? No? Okay. Is this kind of making sense? Yeah. Okay. So we kind of looked at the content piece on page 3 just now, thinking about how the content generates from the major checkpoints or the major assessments. And then on page 4, there's just a quick visual to remind you of this whole sequencing process that we did on the wall. And how did you organize that? I mean, I know we've kind of looked at a few examples, but if you had to describe your process as a group, how did you figure out how you were going to do your progression on the wall?
I think it kind of evolved organically. We just put the same things up on the wall in a random order and sort of shifting them around until some kind of an order presented itself.
Nice. Nice. Just get it out there and see how it kind of wants to move.
It wants to reorganize itself.
Based on what kind of logic? What were you using to help you shift it?
Most so when you see the same 2 other items, either one before or after something else.
Okay, so the
I think it related a
relationships.
little bit to what Charlotte was saying, that it's driving. The first thing that people are going to want to do is get in the car. Let's make it real, right? And let's grab them. And so with car mechanics and operations, it's like get in there, feel what it's like.
But prioritizing is important too.
Prioritizing,
They have to
yeah.
walk into something.
And starting with the concrete, like tangible, like here and now stuff, and then going into, temperament and legal rights. That's a little later.
Yeah, we begin with the car, and then we go to the road, and then we go to certain operations, and then
Like
we
Gary's
get
going
into
to
the
do a history
laws.
lesson.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and start with why the roads are the way they are, right?
Might be 201, but maybe not.
I think it was kind of starting
Nice.
concrete is what it felt like. Concrete,
Okay.
like the real thing, make it feel real.
Nice.
As opposed to abstract.
Nice.
And I was kind of thinking just start locally in the car and then move out to the immediate road and then move out into the other traffic. And so it expands outward from the most concrete thing, which is you sitting inside the vehicle.
Huh.
Molly, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty cut and dried when it's a class where you want everybody to come out with the exact, you want everybody to come out with all of that operating knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
How would you spin this if the class was predicated on everybody doing something that's unique? It's a project,
Mm-hmm.
so they may be as different as night and day. They won't have a lot of the same. Maybe the traits they would share would just be, are they engaging? Is the craft good? All that sort of thing. But the formal aspects are going to be totally different. So
Yep.
the goals would have to be so general. I'm just trying to think of how that scenario would look.
That's a great question. And so I think this is kind of what the intention was for this is very powerful ink. That page 2 space, this is, and I kind of skipped over that quickly, so let's look more closely. This is where you want to really define your project very clearly. You want to explain in as much detail as possible what you want students to do. So,
But suppose it's
mhm.
do a painting,
Okay,
okay?
okay.
You don't tell them what the painting has to be of.
Mm-hmm.
You don't tell them that I haven't taught painting. but
So we're
you
not
tell
doing
them
the
what size
subject
it has to
matter.
be.
Okay.
They have to figure out what the painting is going to be, what the medium is going to be. That's what I'm asking.
Mm-hmm.
Or the subject, the content,
Mm-hmm.
the message.
Some means of assessment, right?
No, I'm just saying because the outcomes are can be so abstract, you just do a painting, an abstract painting, or a realistic painting.
I would guess.
Some common knowledge from somebody, a way of looking at it to tell if it's working or not, or is it entirely
Right.
subjective? Can you teach that?
Technique,
Mm-hmm.
color
I'm
combinations.
trying to, use a more abstract or conceptual thing, like, developing a concept to get people to pay attention to your work. I'll use that as an example, because that's something that I do. So,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying, if each outcome is going to be all on its own, I would say the criteria or the goals would have to be very general, because it would have, if you made them too specific, then they would be constrained.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm stating my question.
Well, I was with you with the painting, but I'm not sure I followed that last one.
I just chose it because an abstract
Yeah.
painting could be anything.
Yeah. It can,
I
but
have one on my wall that I have no idea
yeah.
what the idea behind it was. I just know that somebody did it and I liked it.
Fair enough. But I bet if you look at the course learning outcomes for that class, that there's some specificity there. There's some clarity about technique, or the ability to communicate something that's
Use
readable to the
materials
viewer.
in an interesting and compelling way.
Yeah, you would want to go back to your course learning outcomes and see, well, what were the requirements, and then that would help you clarify your final. So this process, yeah. So it kind of, again, going from the goals to looking at some assessments, or we can think of them as kind of like checkpoints along the trip that will help you plan your journey to each point. And these things really generating the content that you can then sequence and figure out how it's going to flow together. And then the last thing here on page 4 that's kind of exciting about the backward design approach is that basically every day can be a backward design day. Cool. What do I? Sorry, I know it's late in the day, but basically every day there's an outcome. Every day there's specific goals for learning. That doesn't just happen at the end of the course. That happens on day 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 10, 11. Every day you have goals for learning. So using the same process, where would you start? If you're looking at day 1 and you've generated all your content and you finally get this to a 15-week chunkable thing, then you start with your outcomes for that day, right? And then you would think about, okay, this is a small outcome. I know that everything's working to here, but for this day, the first thing that we're going to do, okay, what's the first thing that we're going to do in this class over here?
Schematics and vehicle components and knowing the car.
Okay. Vehicle components, knowing the car, knowing your way around in the car. Does that kind of involve basic operation? Yeah? So what would you want students to be able to do by the end of that
Name the parts,
session?
understand.
Nice. Great. Turn them on in the right way, function the windshield wipers, signal, that kind of thing. Okay, so name and operate the parts maybe. So there you go, simple, right? So that's going to then, if that's going to be their task at the end of the day, then you're going to teach to prepare them for that task, right? You're going to provide the parts, or you're going to have them discover the parts. Go look up the parts. How do you do this? How do you do that? You're going to have them practice and then apply it, right? Some clarity about where they're going, big picture on the day one is super important so they can get inspired, right? Going to be driving a car. Okay, so the last thing I'd like to do is on page 5. Putting all of this big picture process kind of in the larger context of course design, and thinking about the entire course development process. So if this is a timeline, sorry, I just made it vertical here. If this is a timeline and your goal is to create a 15-week course that leads students to the learning outcomes for the course and the program, remember, right, you're part of a larger journey that's very specific, then think about how you would sequence these things. What would come first? What would come second, third, fourth in this process to lead you to that point? Okay? Just take a minute or two. If you want to draw a line from this little elementary school, but you could place it on the timeline where it fits. I think there might be some interesting discrepancies, so I'm curious about what you guys came up with. Yes?
So I started with discussing course needs and goals with the director, because I want to make sure that I had an understanding of where the department is and what they want to do. And then developing a big picture plan. And then filling out the syllabus and course outlining templates. Submitting that, getting approval before I go into detail. Because I didn't want to waste my time writing out every detailed plan, and then like, no, that's not. So I, looking to save some time.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. There's also other sequences that might make sense. Did anyone else have another approach?
Yeah,
We were talking,
Great.
we were
What was it?
almost the opposite.
Okay.
So I started with the big picture plan, and then I go into developing a detailed plan for that big picture plan. Then I said, okay, I'll discuss it with the director at this point, because I kind of get the components there. Then I will, after the discussion, I fill out the syllabus and outline, because knowing that's already kind of there, I fill my parts back in, then submit it. So I think both ways work, but it's kind of interesting when we talk about it. It's like, whoa, completely different ways of approaching it.
Yes.
But I think you both have valid points. I mean, some people might want to look at the big picture and then drill down into that in order to extract what those CLOs would be.
Yeah, agreed. I
Because
think
they have to be pretty general unless there's totally specific. Like, how can they make the letter A?
I think my only thought about that approach is that you might want to check in with the director sooner, because that can be a lot of work, you generating this whole plan, and then if it's not meeting their particular needs for the program, then you might have to go back to the drawing board, and that'd be really sad.
That's why I was like, oh
Yeah.
possibility.
Exactly. So on the last page, and I'm handing out these evaluations. On the last page, there's also some questions to consider. Sorry. On the last page, there's also some questions to consider asking your director or your department that you can use as a guiding conversation. Just take those with us. And then the last point is that we are available. Faculty development, part of our job is to help with course design, right? We do this all the time. We work closely with individuals. So if your department's asking you to write a course or revise a course, call on us. We'll totally walk through the process with you. You can bounce your ideas off of us. We can talk about, different approaches that might engage students, and how to organize your thoughts.